All right, we've settled our technical issues, so thanks everyone for bearing with us. And thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is for the RSIP transition webinar. My name is Ed Kranich with the RSIP team. So moving on to our agenda here. The focus of today's webinar is to provide an update on the status of RSIP and the Power Clerk process changes as we approach the 300 megawatt program target. We will also have an update on our development of a battery storage incentive, an update on the residential solar tariff process, as well as a few other brief updates. In the room today, we have Celia Price, Sarah Pine, Bill Colonis, Isabel Hazelwood, Emily Basham, and Joe Buonanata. And we are recording this webinar, and we'll make the recording and slides available sometime later this week. So feel free to submit questions as the webinar goes on, and we'll get to them at the end. And with that, I will pass it on to Celia Price for an update on the RSIP status.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning. I'm sorry, it's afternoon already. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I wanted to first mention two things. As we approach the 300 megawatts, we plan to have additional webinars and opportunities to interact to keep you informed and support you through this process. So if you have any suggestions for us on the most helpful ways we can keep that communication channel open, please let us know. My contact information and the email addresses and phone numbers for all of us here today are provided on a later slide. And as part of that feedback that we're requesting, please let us know how today's webinar went, what was helpful, what was not, and how we can make this most useful to you. So getting on to the status of RSIP, as most of you are aware, the RSIP program was established by Public Act 1180 and then later updated by Public Acts 15194 and 16212, noted on this slide, which increased our target to 300 megawatts on or before December 31, 2022, whichever occurs sooner. And as most of you know, we are expecting that to happen sooner, and we'll talk about that in a moment. In addition to reaching the target, our policy directive, and you can see that on the slide where we've provided some excerpted text from the statute, is to foster the sustained orderly development of a state-based solar industry. So what that means is that we would like to do our best to help the industry continue to deploy solar at the levels that you have been doing over the last few years. And with your support, we've been able to look at incentives from 2012 to today to prepare for a transition to the market without the RSIP incentives. Of course, we didn't anticipate a change to net metering policy at the same time, and we know you're all later in this webinar. So on this next slide, we're actually showing what our capacity is as of yesterday. So we have reached almost 248 megawatts, or 31,578 approved projects. In calendar year 2018, so last year we approved just over 60 megawatts of projects. So that was our largest calendar year to date. And we are estimating reaching the 300 megawatts in early fourth quarter of this year, possibly around the end of September or early October, though of course this could change depending on volume. Most of you have seen the chart on this slide before. It shows that from 2004 to 2018, and in particular since the Green Bank launched in 2011, as you know, we've reduced incentives steeply, while at the same time your businesses have deployed increasing levels of solar. So you've all done a great job selling solar and getting high levels of solar deployed despite the reduction in incentives. So thank you for that. And with that, on the next slide, we wanted to share the latest data we have on cost and incentive trends. This table shows that the average installed cost in 2018 was $3.57 per watt, The EPDB or the homeowner-owned systems averaged $3.76 per watt, so those were higher than the PBI or third-party owned projects, which averaged $3.46 per watt. And the incentive has dropped now, as we mentioned, to only 9% of the project cost on average. That's for 2018. And for the EPDB homeowner-owned projects, that was 10%, and then a little lower at 7% for PBIs. We also wanted to mention that 81% of projects in 2018 were third-party owned, compared to 72% of all projects since 2012 were third-party owned. So that's increased a little bit in recent years. Just to give everyone a perspective before and after RSIP, if you take an 8 kilowatt size project, say a homeowner-owned project as an example, the cost based on the average we just provided would be $30,000.80, and the incentive would be 10% of that, or about $3,000. And as you know, the ITC is currently at 30%, and that would be a little over $8,000. So the cost after state and federal incentives would be just under $19,000. So just for comparison, without the RSIP, remember that the federal ITC will be higher, and so in this case, the ITC would be about $900 higher, or about $9,000. So the cost after subtracting the federal tax credit would be about $21,000. So I just wanted to share that with you to give you an idea. I'm sure you've looked at that yourself, but once RSIP is no longer available, the cost difference in this example would be about $2,000. And this is important to keep in mind as you prepare to sell these projects without the RSIP incentive. Of course, we should also all note that the ITC is scheduled to step down starting in 2020, when it will go from 30% to 26%, and then in 2021 it will go down to 22%, and then down to 0 in 2022 for homeowner-owned projects. And it will stay at 10% for third-party owned and commercial projects. When we talk about the tariff development process, we'll touch on how the ITC may be factored into that process. Okay. On the next slide, we're just showing you for historical perspective what the incentives have been from step 1 to step 14. Step 14 is now at 21 megawatts in capacity, and remember that we kept the incentive level the same from step 13 to step 14 to help with the transition. And we are planning to keep the step 14 level through the 300 megawatts unless we have a compelling reason to change that. And if that were to happen, of course, we would provide notice to you. And in the past, we have usually provided 30 days notice or more on those changes. On the next slide, we're giving you some idea of what the volume trends have been recently per month. This shows incentive application submissions into PowerClerk over the last 19 months, including the January volume, which only shows what was submitted through yesterday. So as you can see, we had very high volume from August through November. In August, it was 6.9 megawatts and was hovering around 6.5 to 7 megawatts for that 4-month period. In December, we still had healthy volume at about 4.5 megawatts, which is a little bit higher than we usually have in the winter, but we had a mild month, as you know. So we'll see what happens in January and February, which are usually low volume months that are just over 3 megawatts. And then we will continue to provide updates on the PowerClerk login page on a weekly basis to show you where we are on the total capacity. Okay, the next slide.
So when we look a little bit more closely at the types of projects that we see in the RSIP, you can see that the PBI is still the dominant incentive type. Although the PBI projects only made up about 26% of the RSIP portfolio back in 2012, they grew to 72% of market share in 2017 and up to 81% in 2018. In addition to the PBI and the EPBB for homeowner-owned projects, we also started offering an incentive for income qualifying projects back in 2016, and this incentive type is also growing in the uptake. In 2016, about 5% of projects received the low to moderate income incentive. This grew to 10% in 2017 and was about 8% in 2018. We're also observing increasing PV adoption in low to moderate income communities when we look at the income distribution of the RSIP portfolio overall. We do this by measuring the income band of the census tract that the project is located in. So back when we started the RSIP in 2012, only about 20% of projects were in census tracts with an area median income less than 100% of the area median income. And you can compare that to nearly 50% in 2018. So we're seeing a lot of uptake of solar PV in these lower income communities, even regardless of whether the homeowners are actually taking advantage of the low to moderate income performance-based incentives. And then lastly, another way that we look at this is looking at the total distribution of projects within the RSIP. And we're seeing higher penetrations of solar adoption in our lower income census tracts than in our upper income census tracts, which is really encouraging to see that these homeowners are taking advantage of these clean energy programs and are able to stabilize their energy costs and their energy burdens. So we're seeing about 4.5% of households living in census tracts less than 60% of area median income have adopted PV, compared to only 3.3% of households living in census tracts with a median income above 120% of the area median. So this is an indication that we've been able to achieve income parity in solar adoption here in Connecticut, and that we're able to spread the benefits of these programs across all homeowners in the state.
All right, so moving on now, we will be going over a few upcoming changes to Power Clerk, some process changes, and few reminders. So the first thing here is as we approach the 300 megawatts, we've implemented a new way to track the order of incentive applications to Power Clerk. So you may have noticed that there's an RSIP ticket number, or RTN, that's a new field showing up in new applications now. This field, most of the time you'll notice it in the application stage, and it will be blank. And it will be blank anytime you're editing a new application. It only fills in the number when you enter the submitted via internet status. So here I have an example of what it will look like on the home page. So this is the RSIP ticket number, and we'll have that showing up in home screens for applicants pretty soon. So this will work similarly to the RTB project number, except that it'll actually reset every time you submit. So if you submit an app and it gets rejected, then it will have a new RTN number at the next submission. So when we reach the last 20 to 30 megawatts or so, kind of we'll figure that out as we get closer. We will begin reviewing applications in the order of the RTN number. So at the very end, application rejections may result in moving the application back to the end of the line and possibly even losing an incentive. So it'll be very important to make sure that your applications are clean and totally approvable when you hit submit. So get practicing on that early. So we'll let you know when we begin to implement that process. And once we start using it, you will begin to receive a letter at submission, an automatic letter that will go out at submission, which will let the contractor and the customer know what your RTN number is and what your place in line will be. And you can check on our Power Clerk homepage sort of what number we're currently serving, sort of like at a deli line. And that will indicate somewhat whether you can eventually get an incentive. And then once we actually review the app, then you'll get your final letter, which will either be an approval or a rejection of some kind. And so more on that as it develops, which will be over the next couple of months. So the next change that we'll be making is something pretty simple to those who are familiar with EPBBs or with PowerClerk 1. But we will be reverting the PBI application process back to its original form. So for those of you who use PowerClerk 1, you may remember that up front you used to have to submit all of the system details, the inverter, modules, tilt, azimuth, and shade. And we removed that in PowerClerk 2 as a way to kind of streamline the application stage and eliminate change orders. But as we get sort of closer to the 300 megawatts, we want to make sure that we're getting real projects that are fully planned out to make sure that we have a good grasp on what's coming down the 300 megawatt pipeline. So note that with PowerClerk 1 and with PowerClerk 2, you'll have to have everything set up ahead of time, so you'll have to know what your modules, tilt, azimuth, and shade, and all that information will be up front, which may require change orders. So the PBIs will follow a change order process, much like the one for EPBB now. So in the next month or so, we will have more information on that as it comes out, and we will be hopefully implementing it by mid-February. And finally, the third change that we're making to the PowerClerk process is related to the project expiration timelines. So the first change in that is that beginning tomorrow, all projects that are approved as of tomorrow will have an automatic timer put on them. We'll cancel the project after 270 days. So for those of you who have been in the RSIP for a while, you know that we have a expiration on every project. The incentive is good for 270 days, and it has to reach a completion status by then. We enforce that kind of on an as-needed basis, but given the amount of capacity left in RSIP and the amount of work that it takes for us to do this, we decided to move to PowerClerk automatically doing it. So that will leave a lot less wiggle room for things like extensions and any type of plea to spare a project. So PowerClerk will be automatically canceling projects after 270 days beginning tomorrow, but that's only for projects that are approved beginning tomorrow. So anything that's already been approved, even if it reaches 270 days tomorrow, it won't be automatically canceled. It'll be part of that sort of bold process where we have exceptions and things like that and more of a manual cancellation process. So the second part of this change will be starting in mid-February, around the same time that we switch the PBI process over. We will be shifting that timeline from 270 days to 180 days. So taking 3 months off the completion process. So that will be an adjustment, but just note that it's coming down the pipeline. So and then immediately following that, mid-February, we will be changing the 30-day rejected app resubmission timeline to 15 days. Really, for most applications, that shouldn't make too much of a difference because most apps are resubmitted in a short amount of time anyway. But this way, we'll make sure that apps get corrected and sent back in a reasonable amount of time so we can keep everything tighter and just basically keep a better eye on our 300 megawatts. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah for an update on the project expiration deadline.
Thanks, Ed. That's a good intro into what this slide's about, which is the RSIP project expiration deadline. We are trying to clean up PowerClerk as best as we can and keep accurate information together. So starting on Friday, February 15th, we're going to begin going to include projects that are 365 days or older. That's from the RSIP incentive approval date. We won't be able to grant any extensions. We have in some cases allowed for extensions, but as we move closer towards that 300 megawatt target, we have to sort of tighten up. And then Celia has sent out a few emails with all of the information here outlined. If you need any of that, it'll be available in these slides, and then we can also send you the email as well. And next slide. These are just a couple of RSIP reminders. Like Ed said before, once we have the ticket number in place, just double checking any submission. It could be upfront submission, it could be to close the project out. Just double checking to make sure that all of the paperwork lines up, you know, the site plan matches what's in Power Clerk, matches the contract, things like that. Just keep an eye on that. And then payments. We are starting to look at the data monitoring very closely as we approach that 300 megawatts. So the Locust it will need to be up and running for PBI and EPBB projects in order to receive payment. For EPBB projects, if you would like to use the PDP submitted status, please feel free. It does generally take a week or so after putting that project into that status in order for the site to be created in Locust. But that would generally be faster than waiting until EPBB project completion submitted status. If you need information on how to use that status, it is on the Power Clerk homepage where the process guide is. And then if you have projects that you aren't sure how to provide us access to in SolarEdge or SolarLog, Enphase, any of those, there are guides on the Power Clerk homepage as well.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next slide here, this is Celia, is showing our 2019 EPBB payment schedule. For those who are on the 2018 payment schedule, this is very similar to what we did last year, and we're issuing payments every month. And I did send out a schedule a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to note that we have made two changes to the July and to the August batch dates to adjust for staff schedules. So please use this slide as the updated schedule, and we will make sure to send it out with the webinar follow-up as well. And if you have any questions on EPBB payments, please contact me. Again, our email addresses and phone numbers are shown on a later slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Colonis on inspections.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, so just reminders, inspection reports to be submitted through Power Clerk. Make sure you submit the signed self-inspection checklist when you're doing for all projects to upload that for your project. And a reminder, the required photos to keep in the checklist. You know how important data monitoring is to us. Please make sure that's included. Most of you are aware of this, but in October 1st, 2018, the Connecticut State Building Code was updated. Yay. So it applies to projects with permit apps after October 1st. So I provided the link there for you. I would suggest doing a Control F or search for solar or photovoltaic. I think it's page 137 that has most of the updates for you. And as always, contact me, whether it's a self-inspection question or a third-party inspection, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
All right, and we're turning it back over to Celia now for an update on the residential solar tariff development.
Thanks, Ed and Bill. So, as most of you know, in the 2018 legislative session, Public Act 1850 made broad changes to energy policy, including a change to the Class 1 renewable portfolio standard to 40% by 2030. It was previously 20% by 2020. We've summarized the broad sets of changes at a high level in a slide which we're including in the appendix of this presentation. So we're not going to focus on the broad changes right now due to time constraints, but that will be available to you when you get the slide deck in the follow-up to this webinar. For today, we want to focus on Public Act 1850 Section 7, specifically the changes to net metering policy that affect residential solar PV. The legislation specifies that when RSIP ends, the utilities will provide compensation via a tariff structure that will replace net metering. And I also wanted to note that net metering will be grandfathered for existing customers through 2039. So any of your customers that have gotten the RSIP incentive or do their utility interconnection before RSIP ends should have net metering until 2039. For new customers under the tariff structure, we are anticipating, based on the legislation, that they would have two options. So the two options described are, one of them is what's called a buy-all, sell-all, or sometimes called a buy-all, credit-all option. I'll explain those two in a moment, why there's two different names for it sometimes. This means that a customer will get a flat per kilowatt hour rate for solar PV production for a 20-year period and will pay the prevailing retail rate for any electricity consumed. So in this scenario, for this option, there will be no self-consumption of solar production from a billing perspective. So there has been discussion about whether customers will get a check for the production revenue or a credit on their bill. It seems likely, based on the discussions that we have been participating in with PURA, that it will be set up as a bill credit, though of course nothing has been finalized yet. A bill credit will likely not be subject to income tax, which is one of the advantages of calling it or setting it up as a buy-all, credit-all. So the Green Bank has encouraged PURA and DEEP to request a ruling from the IRS to be sure. The second option specified in the legislation has been called different names as well. Sometimes it's called a netting option. Some folks are calling it use by sell, or even buy all, sell some. And essentially this option is similar to what we have now in that it allows for self-consumption, but instead of monthly netting, which is essentially what we have now, the legislation specifies that customers will have only daily or sub-daily or real-time netting, or some other netting that is less daily or less than daily. Because the utility metering and billing systems are not technically able in terms of the metering and billing infrastructure, they're not yet ready to do daily or sub-daily. UI is ready for some of those aspects, but the Eversource infrastructure is not, with the exception of real-time netting. Because of that lack of technical readiness right now, it is a possibility that PURA will choose real-time netting as the netting interval. However, this option does still allow for self-consumption, and because it is a netting option, it could support deployment of battery storage as a way to shift the application of the solar PV production to loads later in the day, for example, when it is most needed. Also, the netting option is still expected to provide a per kilowatt hour compensation rate for any energy that is exported to the grid. I also wanted to note that the tariff rates that PURA sets for both the buy-all, credit-all, and the netting options, of course, will be important. That's going to determine how good the economics will be for customers and, of course, your companies as well. Those rates will most likely be set based on cost recovery, based on the installed cost of these projects, plus a reasonable rate of return. DEEP has created a calculator for this purpose and is thus far using a default rate of return of 10%. The Green Bank has submitted to DEEP and PURA data on installed costs to provide input into this rate setting process, but of course we don't know what exactly will be used in the final rate setting, but we have tried to provide input into that as much as we can. Thus far, it seems likely that PURA will set a rate that is at or higher than the retail rate, but again, we don't know exactly what it will be. The tariff also by legislation can include adders for storage and other priorities, but PURA has not yet brought that up in the discussion in detail since we've been focusing on all the details of the tariff. One other important element that the statute provides for is that PURA may offer an interim tariff to bridge the period between the end of RSIP and when the final tariff is available for customers. And go to the next slide. We have a few updates on the status and timing here. Because the utility metering and billing systems are not yet ready for option 2, meaning all of the possible netting intervals, we were advocating, the Green Bank and the industry were advocating for an interim tariff. Right now, it looks like PURA is likely not to choose to implement an interim tariff, but we haven't gotten a final ruling on that yet. So we hope to get some final ruling from PURA soon. I also wanted to note that Commissioner Betkowski, who is currently presiding over PURA since the prior commissioner chair, Katie Dykes, is now the DEEP commissioner. Commissioner Betkowski has signaled that they will be coming out with a draft ruling, at least on the commercial tariff, in the next week or so, and that they will likely speak to some of the common tariff elements that we're discussing. So we'll hope to have some more word on that soon. On the next slide, we're showing 2 diagrams which were provided by Eversource during the PURA hearing processes. And this shows what the metering would likely look like for the 2 tariff options. Under the buy all, credit all diagram on the right, production would be measured separately from usage. So customers would get a per kilowatt hour compensation rate for their solar production, and then there is a separate meter that measures that customer's usage, and again, as we mentioned, they would be paying the retail rate for that usage. For the netting option, or the use by sell on the left, customers would still be able to self-consume, so any production used on site would be credited to the customer on their bill and subtracted from their usage. On the next slide are some considerations that we discussed at the recent contractor event. These are some of the considerations around the tariff development. We're not going to go into this in detail right now due to time, but we may come back to this time permitting, and we can certainly go into this in more detail in a future webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Isabel Hazelwood and update on our battery storage incentives efforts.
Thanks, Dalia. Just a quick update on 2 battery-related initiatives that we're working on. Some of you may already heard about UI's pilot. It's called Connect Sun in Fairfield, Connecticut. They're looking at the ability of highly concentrated DER deployment to provide load relief on specific distribution circuits. We're working with UI on that pilot, and we have a limited battery storage incentive available to customers that participate in that pilot. So if you're working with customers in the Fairfield area, they may be eligible, especially if they're interested in battery storage. You can reach out to myself, Isabel Hazelwood, or Emily Basham at the Green Bank, and we can provide you with more detail on that program if you think you might have an eligible customer. And then we're also working on trying to obtain funding for a statewide battery incentive program through a state program called the Connecticut Electric Efficiency Partners Program. If we're approved for funding, we'd be looking at using a battery storage incentive to help deploy storage and provide peak load relief to the electric grid here in Connecticut. So we just submitted that application in December. No major updates yet, but we should have some more information for you guys within the next couple of months. And now I'll turn it over to Joe Buonanata to talk about SmartE.
Thanks, Isabel, and good afternoon, everyone. So quickly, some brief updates on the SmartE loan for folks on the line that are familiar or might be interested in learning more about the Green Bank's main residential financing option for efficiency and solar. SmartE is available statewide for loan amounts as little as $500 to as high as $40,000. There are 9 lenders, banks, and credit unions across the state who are actively offering the SmartE loan. And over the course of the past few years, we've come a pretty long way with our lender partners that we've now reached near instant pre-approvals with several of the lenders statewide. So there shouldn't be a barrier anymore of long wait times with homeowner applications for credit pre-approval. So that's a big hurdle that we've overcome with SmartE, where typically you're finding out, if not that same business day, within 1 to 2 business days if the homeowner has been pre-approved for the loan. So that's an exciting development. We have some updates in terms of offerings that are available to contractors that you might be interested in for the new year. Specifically, the new offer of the contractor-funded interest rate buy-down option, where you're able to offer your customers lower interest rates than the rates that are up there on the screen. Those are the fixed, not-to-exceed rates, where you're able to offer lower rates if you cover the interest that would have typically accrued over the course of that term. So happy to have either individual conversations, or if anyone wants to reach out to us, we're more than happy to discuss and provide some guidance on how you can get your company set up to participate in the interest rate buy-down option. The SmartE email address and telephone number is there on the screen, or if you have my contact information, you can reach out to me directly. And if just one last slide on SmartE is just the map of the lenders. So again, statewide coverage, and we're happy to schedule either in-person refresher trainings for your sales staff, or online webinars that we offer weekly for contractors. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Emily Basham for the
Hey guys, we just wanted to flag a couple of programs related for electric vehicles. Just a reminder that the state's cheaper program is not fully subscribed yet, so the Connecticut Hydrogen and Electric Automobile Purchase Rebate Program through DEEP is still available as a rebate incentive up to $5,000 for Connecticut residents who purchase or lease a new eligible either battery electric, plug-in hybrid electric, or fuel cell electric vehicle. And we've included the link to the website for the cheaper program so you can see exactly which vehicles are eligible for the rebate, as well as the available funds remaining in the program. So just flag that. And also our second program, we're offering a Nissan Leaf special offer for the 2019 models, and this is a manufacturer incentive that we're offering up to $5,000. When you combine this with other EV incentives, as you can see from the chart on the slide, you can really reduce the sticker price of these vehicles by half. So we're offering a discount code that's available to any person or organization with an electric bill. So thinking about some of your residential and commercial customers that could take advantage of improving their fleet. So I just wanted to flag that as kind of an ancillary product as you guys are thinking about bundling products and marketing. And now we'll turn it back to myself, actually. Realize I have this slide. Additional opportunities to stay engaged on all of these topics. We, of course, want to make sure you guys are visiting the PowerClerk login page to continue to stay updated on our progress towards 300 megawatts. The link is there. I'm sure you guys know it well. And also make sure that your contractor listing information is available and up to date on Go Solar CT. And for more of the policy or legislative matters, please consider engaging with Solar Connecticut, other contractors, and us to provide input in the PURA process as we sort through our new tariff world. We find it really valuable to pool all of our knowledge and have consistent messaging so that we can make sure we're fostering the sustained, orderly development of the PV industry. And we've included the links for the PURA website so you can see these dockets. You can also sign up to receive notifications about when new hearings are scheduled and interrogatories are requested. Just a small note that you have to use Internet Explorer for the website. And a final note that we are constantly thinking about the best ways to communicate with you, and we would love your feedback on how you want to receive information. You know, whether you think you're not getting enough information, you'd like to get more, or you're interested in additional webinars, or maybe joining an email listserv. That's all feedback that we would really appreciate. We're going to kind of prompt you with a survey that we'll include with the materials for this webinar. And if you could complete that, we will hear you and try to respond in the most convenient way to stay updated with all of these moving pieces. So we're in it together. And with that,
we will turn it over to questions. So if anyone has any questions, there's a few that have come in already, but if you have any more, please send in now. If not, or if you think of something later, you can always send it to us at a later date when we send the presentation by email, probably towards the end of this week. So just looking through the first ones here. Okay. Celia, I think this one might be for you. I think a lot of these might be for you, so not to put you on the spot. So the first question is, are there any proposals for this legislative session to extend the RSIP until the utility companies can implement the software and hardware needed to manage a tariff program?
So that has definitely come up. We did offer in our comments to PURA on one of their comment requests that we could assist with the process by finding a way to stretch out the end of RSIP. So that is something that has come up throughout all these proceedings. Thus far, what we think is most practical is similar to what Ed was describing earlier, which is that when we get close to the 300 megawatts, we will use the ticketing system so that, similar to, say, you have a crowded room of people, you don't let new people in until some people leave. So what we were thinking is that as projects complete, then we would approve additional projects. So far, that's what we think is the most practical way to manage the end of RSIP to make sure we don't go over the 300 megawatts, and that will likely also help make the end of RSIP timing reasonable and potentially help us with the transition. There are other things that could be considered if that need arises, but thus far that's what we're thinking.
So the end of RSIP brings the end of, or the beginning of the tariff.
Yes, so as Ed just reiterated, based on the statute, once RSIP ends, that's when the final tariff should be in place, and also that's when net metering ends. And of course, there are some uncertainties around that because we don't know yet what PURA's ruling is on the final tariff, and we also know that the utilities will need to make sure that they get all of that implementation done in time for RSIP ending. And then lastly, we don't know what might transpire during the legislative session if the legislators may provide some assistance to deal with the transition process, given that RSIP seems to be reaching the 300 megawatts more quickly than people may have anticipated.
Thanks, Celia. Okay, so we've got a 2 or 3 part one here, so just bear with me while I condense it. Actually, Celia, I'll give you this one now. Do the utility companies still want control over all battery backup systems after the transition takes place?
So we haven't heard that the utilities want control over all the battery backup systems yet. So right now, I know generally that would be probably something that would be advantageous for them. But right now, the systems that we know of that have that have been implemented that are solar plus battery projects have been primarily for battery backup, and the utilities, of course, given that it's just for backup, haven't tried to have control over the battery storage. Of course, as more battery storage is deployed, we are hoping that other use cases besides battery backup could be come into play. For example, battery storage that helps with load shifting and takes advantage of time of use rates. And in that case, of course, then it would be more important to make sure that the timing of when the battery's charging and discharging would be advantageous to customers as well as to the grid. And in that case, in some jurisdictions, utilities want to participate in that and have that control. In Connecticut so far, we haven't specifically heard from the utilities that they want to do that. So in the battery storage programs that Isabel was describing, there could be other options on the table. For example, you as contractors could help customers set up your batteries so that they will charge and discharge at certain times that are beneficial. And also, third-party companies could participate in a way that they are able to aggregate projects and also control them virtually. Some battery manufacturer companies also are developing that capability as well.
Thanks, Celia. I feel bad these are all going to you. But
that's okay.
Have there been any updates on third-party access to tariff payments? So financing entities, lease PPA companies. So
again, we don't have the final word from PURA yet, but it seems the impression we're getting is that at least initially, it seems that folks at PURA and other stakeholders are leaning towards a buy-all, credit-all, which would mean that customers would get a credit on their utility bill. What that means is if it's set up as that instead of a buy-all, sell-all, then it's probably harder to assign that revenue stream to a third party. And not assigning it to a third party may also help with the tax implications in that if you're not getting a check, if you're just getting a credit on a bill, then it may be more likely that the income tax won't come into play in that situation. So right now, it looks like that revenue stream might not be available to third parties, in which case third parties would have to factor that into their pricing.
Okay. There's a couple here that I can answer, so I'll give you a break.
Thanks, Ed.
So a few questions here about the Power Clerk process. And Sarah, jump in if you can help with I don't quite know yet. The first question is step 14 the last step in the Green Bank program? The short answer is probably, but we don't quite know yet. So we did set up step 14 to take us to the end of RSIP, but we did reserve the right, and we do reserve the right to possibly make a step 15 if needed. So far we haven't made that consideration yet. So as of right now, until further notice, step 14 is it until we reach the 300 megawatts. The next question here about are projects approved to install prior to February 15th still approved after February 15th? And the answer to that question is yes. So on February 15th, we won't be necessarily making a mass cancellation or a big change in any type of process of maintaining these projects, but we will be doing a cancellation of expired projects on the 15th. And that applies to projects that have been approved for 365 days or more at that time. So that it is separate from the 270-day timeline, which will be an automatic thing going forward starting tomorrow. So really what we were talking about with the February 15th project completion deadline, that's more of kind of what we're doing for the older projects that don't have this automatic timer on it yet. And I presume that in the next couple of weeks, we'll be sending out notices that have a little bit more specific information for contractors, kind of on an individual basis about your projects that are outstanding and that need to be completed. So that question is a little tough to answer for the broad group of contractors, but just know that in the next couple of weeks, we will let you know if you have any projects that are in danger of being canceled or that are expired. And kind of as we go on, you'll always have plenty of notice, especially with the projects that within 9 months from now will be automatically canceled in PowerClerk. You'll get automatic notifications from PowerClerk that'll say, you know, you have 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, et cetera, until these cancel. Another question here about the thermometer in PowerClerk, and I believe this is just asking if we could change it to, I guess, a finer measurement. So instead of having megawatts in there, we can maybe add a few decimal places. We could certainly do that. So we can go down to kilowatts. Right now, we've got about 52 or 53 megawatts to go, so we've got plenty of room, but I'm happy to add some more decimal places. Up to 3, I think, is what we can fit. So this next one, back to Celia. What role will the Green Bank play in residential solar deployment post RSIP? Will companies have to maintain eligible contractor status, continue with energy audits, submitting applications to PowerClerk, et cetera? Actually, I could probably answer that. Generally, no. So the eligible contractor status won't be necessary anymore if you're not in RSIP. We hope that you will still maintain all of the same levels of quality control and of general adherence to, say, SIA guidelines in the future. But after RSIP, it will really be under the jurisdiction of all your usual laws, so State of Connecticut law, Department of Consumer Protection, and occupational licenses and local AHJs and et cetera. Yep. And
thanks, Ed. And so as Ed was saying, we won't be administering that tariff. It will be the utilities administering the tariff structure. And I just wanted to add that we are hoping to get the battery incentive program approved, in which case we would be administering that program if it gets approved. And also, we're looking at ways that we can still continue to help with deployment of clean energy generally. And so that's something that we're planning out right now and thinking about how we can still support the various markets, both for renewable energy and energy efficiency, even if we're not administering the programs.
And this is Joe from the Smarty side. The end of RSIP won't impact the continuation of Smarty financing either. That program will still be available. So you still will need to remain in compliance with the Smarty program guidelines with licensing and insurance, et cetera. So that process will not be changing this year at all.
Thanks. And so we're about at time, but we have 2 more quick questions that I can just get to quickly. So again, just a reminder, if anybody has any additional questions, please just email them to us. You can reply to our our contact information, which is on the screen now, and you can also reply to our webinar email that we send out later on this week with a copy of the presentation and everything like that. So for these last couple of questions, is there an estimate for when the 300 megawatt threshold will be reached? Yes, but they're just estimates, so we currently expect sometime maybe early Q4 or even late Q3 of this year, but only time will tell. So really, when we get closer, really we'll know more for sure when we have about 10 megawatts to go. So keep up to date on the PowerClerk homepage. We try to keep that updated weekly, and in the future we'll have up to 3 decimal places of capacity on there. And then the last question, so what can contractors do to be part of the transition structure to the tariff and, kind of helping shape what the market will be like? So there will be a survey that's sent out with this webinar presentation, and we encourage you, if you have any thoughts or if you want to speak with anyone, definitely talk to Mike Trahan at Connecticut, and definitely reach out to us. You can reach out to Matt Masunis. I believe his contact info is on the screen now.
Yes, he's there.
Okay.
Yep,
so reach out definitely to Mike Trahan. He can keep you up to date on when the upcoming hearings are at PURA, or Matt Masunis here. And if you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out to any one of us. Contact info is on the screen. So with that, thank you everyone for attending, and we will have a copy of the presentation and a recording sent out sometime later this week. And so thanks a lot and have a great day.